I'm feeling rather bold today, so I'm going to do something that I've never done before, in public or in private. I'm going to walk you through some of my old Facebook statuses. So we'll start with this gem from February of 2009, in which a bright-eyed 15-year-old Brian Erickson let the world know that he isn't studying. In April, we followed up with a medical report. Very specific. And then in August, I really started to pour my heart out and let everyone know that I was kind of indifferent about going back to school. And then about a year or so later, we can see an older and more mature Brian starting to think about the really important things in life. So these are just 4 examples, and there are easily dozens, if not hundreds of others that I could have used. But this is familiar, right? These are the kinds of things that clog our social media news feeds every day. And it's become something of a cliche to say that social media has changed the world, but one of the chief ways that it's done so is that it's exposed us to this kind of material, stuff that's boring and aimless and insignificant, but that we nonetheless choose to consume all the time. In fact, according to Pew Research, about 73% of adults in the United States are on some kind of social networking site, 90% if we look just at ages 18 to 29. So even though we might make fun of the banality of it all, the bottom line is that we're taking up a whole lot of space in each other's lives. But what are we doing there? The answer that I want to put forth today is that we keep returning to social networking because we're looking for something. Something that most of us can't quite name, but that we all crave just the same. What we're looking for is perspective. And when I say perspective, I'm using it as a sort of catch-all for moments that show what we see, or what others see, what we want, what others want, what's true for us, what's true for others. And perspective is actually something that social media is really, really good at giving us. But to start, I want to distinguish perspective from opinion. Now, certainly there's no shortage of opinion on social networking, right? There's no shortage of people posting their political convictions, their likes, their dislikes, etc., across their social platforms. Now, whether you think that's useful or not, and maybe sometimes it can be, nothing could be further from perspective than the mere statement of opinion. You know, because perspective is about expansion. It's about taking the way you see the world and growing it in some way. Opinion, even if it's well thought out, well researched, well articulated, is almost always constrictive rather than expansive. Opinion tends to predicate itself on I'm right, they're wrong, you're wrong. Perspective is sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, let's find out more. But I think it's this failure to differentiate between opinion and perspective that accounts for the way we use social networking today. A wealth of research, done mostly by psychologists, links social media usage to isolationism, jealousy, and even low self-esteem. Now, there are a lot of explanations as to why this is, but in my mind, the most compelling is that social media has this tendency to turn everything we do into a game of opinion, right? How can I get the most likes? In fact, a 2012 study out of the University of Utah, which looked at the effect of Facebook use on young people, found that users of the site were more likely than their offline peers to think that life is unfair, to judge others based on short-term concerns, and to have this generally pessimistic outlook of the world. So if this is the case, if social media is giving us all of these negative psychological effects, why do we return? I struggled to answer that question because, as we saw at the beginning of this talk, I have certainly been guilty of oversharing on Facebook, right? Oversharing whatever it is that came to my mind. And I can attest to the strangeness of this behavior. It's not like I really knew what I was hoping to get out of posting about finding my keys. It was that I had this illogical belief that if I could just project everything on my mind out into the world, that I would get something back. But all I really got was a crowded newsfeed, a couple of likes, never as many as I wanted, ever, and this big open wound waiting to be filled with judgment. So why do we keep returning? What's the point? Why don't we just disconnect? The point is that sometimes you stumble across moments like this, or this, or this. These are the moments that capture what I'm talking about today, perspective. These are moments that challenge us, that make us uncomfortable, but that most of all give us clarity. So let's get specific. We have this idea of what perspective is, but how can you actually know in the moment if something is going to give you that kind of clarity? To try and answer that, I put together this 5-part litmus test. And if the answer is yes to any of these questions, then you might want to pull out a camera or send out a tweet, because you could be experiencing a moment of great perspective. I call these Brian's guidelines for becoming internet famous. They will. All right, question number 1. Does the moment juxtapose 2 or more items that seem contradictory? This classic photo, for example. In other words, does the moment collapse a binary that you thought existed? Question number 2. Does the moment encapsulate something you've heard about, read about, or seen in the media, but never witnessed in person? And as our young friend in this photo can attest, this can be a very scary experience. Question number 3. Does the moment bring to life a thought or dream you've had in the past? In other words, does the moment make real something you assumed could only happen in fantasy? Question number 4. Does the moment recall an event from the past and frame it in a new way? Simply put, does the moment remind you of something you've seen before, but with a twist? Does it give you a different kind of picture? Which leads us nicely into question number 5. Does the moment present a fuller picture of a subject matter with which you thought you were familiar? Simply put, does the moment make it impossible to look at something the same way again? And that's it. That's the entire test. So when I tell this to people, the response tends to be, okay, I guess that's a way to get some cool photos or some nice pictures, but so what? What's the point? And that's a good question. So in an attempt to answer it, I decided that I would put the test to the test. I would go through life with these questions in the back of my mind and see what happened. There are a few things that surprised me. First off, if you are still stuck in this how can I get the most likes mindset, the test is actually going to be really, really helpful. You know, people love when you post this kind of stuff, and I think the reason goes back to my initial hunch, that perspective is the goal of social media in the first place. It's what we're looking for. We wouldn't make room for all this extra noise if we didn't hope to get something out of it. So when we show these moments that show something, people respond. But beyond becoming popular online, when I started to go through life with these questions as a guide and really look for these kinds of moments, I couldn't stop finding them. You know, they're happening all the time. There were many different examples that I stumbled across. Some are funny, some are sad, some are weird, some are touching, but I'm going to focus in on just one. A couple of weeks ago, I was driving past this major intersection where a lot of people will stand on the corner and ask for tips. And so I was driving past, and sure enough, there was a man asking for spare change, but his methodology was a little different. So in exchange for $1, he was offering poems. $1 for a few, famous authors, no downers, and my favorite, do not read poems while you're driving. So I thought that this was so inventive and so clever that I started to go through the test in my mind. All right, question 2. Does the moment recall something from the media? Absolutely. There's a movie called Before Sunrise where something just like this happens. But I assumed that that was too romanticized to happen in real life. Alas, it was not. So that was a check. Question number 4. Does the moment recall something from the past and frame it in a new way? Totally. As I said, there are always people asking for tips at this intersection, but never in a way that's this creative. So I didn't really know in the moment what this image meant or why it stood out as much as it did. I just knew that it had passed the test. And far be it from me to betray Brian's guidelines for becoming internet famous. So I asked if I could take his picture, and he agreed. Gave him $1, got some poems, and went home. And I looked at the picture, and I really asked myself, okay, is there anything perspective-y about this moment, this image? I looked at it, and I thought about it, and I realized that for me, this moment had redefined innovation. You know, that's a term that you hear all the time, but what does it really mean? Well, in this case, it meant this guy, at least it did for me. You know, most people don't think of the homeless as innovators, and yet here is a man literally innovating panhandling. So in effect, what the moment had done is it had taken this abstract concept that I had heard about for so long and defined it in terms of an observed experience, in terms of a lived experience. And when I shared it on social media, that's where it became really interesting, because there were a bunch of different reactions, you know? Brightened my day, so creative, so funny, whatever it was. People had taken this image, this moment, and made it their own. It had given them some kind of clarity into something bigger. And that's why we document perspective, because it defines the abstract in terms of the concrete. And this is where we arrive at the notion of the American dream. Now, there are a lot of different interpretations as to what that phrase, American dream, really means. But in order for it to mean anything, the ideals that it implies, freedom, opportunity, justice, all of those things have to exist, and they have to exist in single, identifiable, documented moments. And we have to look for those moments. And when we find them, we have to record them. And when we record them, we have to share them so that everybody can see what an idea of value looks like in action in the world. I believe that if we're attuned to the moments that shape perspective, we'll find that even our loftiest ideals and most vaguely defined values actually surround us physically at all times. Bravery, injustice, love. I want you to envision a world where every day we record and share the moments that inspire us, that make us uneasy, that make us say, huh. It's a world where our hearts and minds are connected and where our values and perspectives are constantly on display. These are the tools. These are the moments. You look great. Where will you find yours? Thank you.